What is up, people? We are here with our first official episode of the Magic of Filmmaking. Of course, besides the pilot. So, what are we talking about today? Well, for the first episode, we need to do something special, right? Well, I guess you could call this special for this review. Yes, this is a review. Will be the first episode, and for the first episode, yes, I'm making this complicated intentionally, we will be looking at the one, the only, the classic Dr. No, starring Sean Connery. And if you're unfamiliar with this movie, even this movie title, and if you're unfamiliar with Sean Connery, Dr. No is the first official theatrical James Bond movie. I'm aware that about a year or two earlier there was a TV version of Casino Royale, but let's be honest, it's a TV version. It wasn't made for theaters, so I don't think that counts. They need to be theatrically released, so Dr. No is the first of them all. And when you watch it, it's actually a pretty decent start to the James Bond series. So, let's look at the positives of this movie. For one thing, it's very classic, to say the least. When you watch it, there is this sense of prestige to it. Now, obviously, Sean Connery is a great actor, playing probably the most famous British character, at least here in America. I know Sean Connery is Scottish, he's still in that realm. We will be going over spoilers, so if you haven't seen Dr. No, then you ought to skip and go to episode 2 and come back when you've seen it, or if you don't care, then whatever. Dr. No is about James Bond, Bond, and his adventure to South America, where he has to stop Dr. No. Because, at least to my knowledge, most of the James Bond films, or maybe all of them, the name of the film is actually the name of the villain. Because this movie's called Dr. No, that's the name of the villain. We'll get to Dr. No a little later. James Bond must go to an island called Crab Key, but it's a very complicated trip, to say the least, where he has to deal with people working for Dr. No. He gets assistance from other people who want to stop Dr. No. There's romance involved. They overplay how deadly a tarantula is, like immensely, because as we all know, if a tarantula bites you, you're not gonna die. But the movie, because it was kind of a stereotype back then that a tarantula bite would kill you. It's you can kind of tell this movie's old because of that. But that's not the main thing about this movie. The main thing that I really appreciate about this movie is Sean Connery's performance as James Bond. Because he's the first actor to really play James Bond, not including the 60s Casino Royale thing, because he's the first actor to play James Bond on a theatrical level that's going to be released worldwide, he did a really good job, all things considered. Now, it must be mentioned that this entire series is based on books. I'm not sure if every movie's based on a book, but to my knowledge, at least most of them are based on books. Dr. No is actually the 6th James Bond book. I mean, yeah, you had Casino Royale, of course, but Dr. No, for some reason, they chose the 6th book. Not sure why, but I don't think it was a bad book to choose from. Another positive to this movie is obviously the music. One thing that this movie definitely invented that James Bond would be carrying for the next 60 years. It came out in 1962, so yeah. It is 110 minutes long. Not very long, all things considered, though it does feel a little longer than that. And, well, if there's one thing that this movie definitely uses a lot, is the James Bond theme. Some people say it uses it too much. I don't really mind, because the theme is really incredible. Like, really incredible. This is literally like the one thing about this movie that has stuck through all the way to No Time to Die, a movie they released 60 years later. The James Bond theme has always been a mainstay in this franchise, and for good reason. It is a really good theme. When it kicks in, and it just, not only is it a really good theme in general, but it really fits James Bond. It really shows that this is a guy that has to get into very action-packed, deadly situations. In terms of action, this movie has action sequences, but not many. But you can definitely see how this movie is very influential, how it catapulted so many aspects of action films. Like the explosions. There aren't that many explosions, but the few explosions, the car chases, the characters being a lot smarter. One character who is often compared to James Bond is Indiana Jones. Because Indiana Jones, like James Bond, is about a guy who goes on adventures around the world to discover certain things, whether it be having to assassinate a villain or discover and retrieve an artifact, such as the Ark of the Covenant. James Bond doesn't retrieve artifacts, of course, but he does kill villains. At least, that's what Dr. No is about. It's about James Bond having to go and stop this evil scientist, considering he's very, well, to the most people, he's just some shady guy. Then you learn later on his actual scheme. And I do have to say, after watching Dr. No, I was impressed just how well it holds up. And it just goes to show how influential that the first James Bond movies really were. You can see so much about Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is often considered the most influential action-adventure movie. Honestly, I think that title should go to James Bond. Because after watching this, there is such clear influences that it has on Indiana Jones. Of course, the story that was come up that you may not know about is that it kind of started with James Bond, Indiana Jones, where Steven Spielberg actually wanted to make a James Bond film. A film about a guy who goes on adventures around the world. But George Lucas presented to him a different idea, where instead of him making a British movie, he could make an American version, which was, of course, Indiana Jones. I feel like Dr. No really does present a lot of things that we use in modern films, like adventuring around the world, smart characters, car chases, so much that really, like... Now, of course, I'm sure Dr. No also had some influences of its own. It's very hard to find the original of any type of movie. You could only really argue a few answers, like, if you want to talk the original vampire horror movie, you could probably use Nosferatu, but even though that movie's really old, it's literally 40 years older than Dr. No, it's like, I don't know, there might be vampire movies like it that came before it. But Dr. No presents an interesting situation where you see the villain, and he's very much inspired by Japanese, in my opinion. Like, at times I actually feel like I'm watching a 60s Godzilla movie with the villain. I'll save the villain a little later because I have something to say about him. Another positive is the female character. No, not the Asian one. I'm talking about the one that comes later. Yes, she's introduced very late in the story, but you know what? She's a likable character nonetheless. And to my knowledge, this is the only James Bond film I've seen so far. One of the few James Bond girls to survive. Yeah. James Bond is a ladies' man. Like, you think Indiana Jones is a ladies' man? If you paired them together, all the girls would be going for James Bond. He's just that suave and charming. And while Indiana Jones is more grittier than James Bond, James Bond is a lot more science fiction, where Indiana Jones would be more fantastical with all the religious stuff, where Dr. No definitely dives a lot more into science fiction with the use of nuclear weapons and such and such. It's kind of funny that this is the first James Bond film, and he's already like, want to take over the world. Cliche. Some self-awareness right there. And the movie takes itself mostly seriously, but there are jokes, of course, and it is relatively comedic, which does sometimes work in its favor. And overall, the cast is actually pretty good. Yes, I already mentioned Sean Connery. He's really incredible. And, of course, who ends up being his girlfriend by the end. She's also likable. But there's other characters, too, of which it's hard to name them all, but you have Felix, Professor R.J. Dent, Miss Turreau, and Sylvia Trench. Also, the girl I was talking about, her name is Honey. Such a... I don't know, something about that just... so cliche, but it works in the context of it. James Bond. And, yeah, those are some positives. Especially the fact that it shows off South America and it makes it look like a cool place to be at. South America is a place that I'd be kind of scared to go to, but you know what? Dr. No kind of makes it look like a cool place. And it even shows off their culture pretty well. Now, I want to talk about some things about the movie that I didn't really like very much. One thing that I think was a big missed opportunity, the villain, Dr. No, played by Joseph Wiseman. He's a cool villain on paper, and he has some scary scenes, but overall, he's just not a very strong villain, and this is primarily because he doesn't have that much screen time. He really only has 3 notable scenes. The scene where he's giving the tarantula to the guy to kill James Bond, the scene where he talks to James Bond at the dinner table, and the scene really towards the end where they're about to launch a bomb, and James Bond follows the plan, and Dr. No tries to drown James Bond, tries to kill him. If there's one thing about Dr. No that I will say, like, I don't think he's a bad villain, because one thing that sets him apart is his hands that are more metallic. And even though he has little screen time, the screen time he does have is actually pretty menacing, with how, even though he's the typical I want to take over the world thing because the world denied me. He does, I think it's his acting that really helps the character, and you wonder why he doesn't just kill James Bond. It's because he found James Bond different, and you might say, oh, it's lazy. I don't know, something about it's just the acting really that really sets him apart from any other normal villain that he would be. And the robot arms also play a factor in it, and they seem like they're just there for aesthetics, but then they actually play a part in the story, because they actually lead to Dr. No's demise when he's falling in the nuclear waste, but he's unable to catch himself because he's sliding on the pole that's made of metal, and because he doesn't have normal fingers, he's not really able to grip onto him well, and thus slides down to his death. And you gotta admit that it does really make sense that Dr. No wouldn't have too much screen time because he's a very secret character. At the same time, he could have had more. It really is a situation where the screen time you have is really what makes the character work, even though he probably should have had more screen time, because while the screen time he does have does help him a lot, like I said, he only really has 3 notable scenes, and because he's on Crab Key, and they're not able to invade Crab Key until way later. I also love how they say, like, there's a dragon, and because it even shows that James Bond isn't a perfect character, because he wants to look at the dragon thing, and he's like, you know what, let's take this thing out. but his I guess he was too confident, and not only does he get one of his people killed, but he gets captured because of it. So, yeah, it really helps because yes, it's a problem that James Bond isn't gonna make all the right decisions, but that's kind of what helps because it makes it feel more realistic. Like when you have these characters like Han Solo who are just perfect freaking warriors who never make any bad mistakes and they're only losing when they get into situations they can't win. It's not like that. Kind of like Indiana Jones, James Bond makes mistakes, and that's what helps make him feel more real. Because sometimes we do underestimate our situations, and we don't realize that we're outmatched until it's too late. Kind of like Indiana Jones, where obviously his fear of snakes, but also the fact that, like in the third Indiana Jones, he makes a very big mistake, but we're not here to talk about Indiana Jones, of course. And this is all based on the first James Bond. Once again, I'm trying to like really home in on this specific movie because yes, James Bond has like 26 films. So he is a character who has a lot to work with. But I wanted to really just focus in on this movie. Not watch anything else, not spoil myself with anything else. Doctor No is not considered one of the best James Bond films. Like I think it's top 10 for most people, but it's not like top 5 for most people. And honestly, I can see why. I feel like as I go on, even in the Sean Connery movies, there's definitely going to be some better ones. The thing about Doctor No that's surprising is the fact that it's the first James Bond film, and it's surprising how well they're able to make it. Because usually with movies, it's hard when you get like a movie and it's going to have a big franchise like this to really get the first movie down, the tone and all that. And Doctor No actually manages to get everything down pretty well. Kind of like how Raiders of the Lost Ark, again, Indiana Jones, also really sets the stage for Indiana Jones. This isn't like Marvel, where the first Iron Man had a set tone, but then they kind of deviate from that tone a lot throughout the MCU. Like, a lot. No, Doctor No simply has the tone, and it really does set the stage for James Bond. And when you consider how long ago it came out, and how timeless a lot of the aspects of it are, it really makes you realize that Doctor No is probably one of the most influential movies of all time. Like, sure, it's not the best James Bond, at least from what I've heard. Of course, I haven't seen the others. But it is the first. It started everything. So everything influential about James Bond really originated from Doctor No. I mean, it has the most beloved James Bond actor. Yes, I know some people prefer Daniel Craig and some people prefer Roger Moore. To that I say, people who prefer Daniel Craig, you are, I feel like you are just the type of people I don't want to make it sound bad, but you're kind of just people who like stuff because it's modern, which isn't a bad thing, okay? Like, if you are more tied to modern stuff, that's just how it is. Like, it kind of feels unfair, but, yeah. And people who prefer Roger Moore makes a little more sense because he is also older. I think he directly preceded Sean Connery, or at least came somewhat right after Sean Connery. But Sean Connery is the definitive one, because even though I said a few people prefer Roger Moore and Daniel Craig, most people seem to prefer Sean Connery. And Doctor No by itself, if it was the only James Bond film we ever got, would James Bond be as popular? Probably not, because in order to become more popular, kind of need to have more. But if Doctor No was the only James Bond film they ever made, honestly, I still think it'd be very influential on a lot of people. Of course, I do think the rest of the franchise heavily helped popularize it. I mean, geez, there's a lot of these movies. And, well, coming right after this is From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice. And I think after that, Sean Connery is no longer James Bond. Nope, he actually keeps playing James Bond until approximately 1971. Because they take a break with him with On Her Majesty's Secret Service with George Lazenby. Excuse me for that name pronunciation. But yeah, Sean Connery played him in a good amount of movies. And then, yes, he was technically preceded by Roger Moore because John Connery's last James Bond film is Diamonds Are Forever. And the very next James Bond film is Live and Let Die, featuring Roger Moore. And then, of course, you had George in the middle of all that. And, well, there are a ton of James Bond films. More than you can count. Unless you have enough fingers to count to 26. But, Dr. No, if you are at all interested in more classic films and you do like action-adventure, I think Dr. No is honestly a must-watch. It really did set the stage for what a James Bond film could be. And honestly, I think it's really, really interesting. Even if it's not perfect. I mean, how would it be perfect? To wrap this all up, I was impressed by James Bond. I was worried I was going to be not like it very much because of its age, but no, I actually do really like it. And I'm excited to see what the other Sean Connery films, Roger Moore, and Daniel Craig films have in store. I might check out the other actors, but right now I'm just kind of more about Sean Connery. But who knows? Maybe I'll be impressed by Roger Moore. Okay, I've hit the limit. So, that's it for episode 1 of The Magic of Filmmaking.